Please welcome co-founder and Chief Executive Officer, Will Marshall.
Thanks, everyone. So now we have time for some Q&A. If you want to put questions in, you're welcome to put them in the top of the box where it says Q&A. There's already some come in. Let me start tackling them. So the first one, has something like fusion monitoring been done before? Who do you anticipate will utilize and benefit from this? Well, of course, data fusion of a kind has been done many times before, but I think this is the first time that we have a commercial Earth imaging data fusion product available. So that's a bit of a first. And who will utilize and benefit from it? Definitely the agricultural sector, as I mentioned. Also, I think we'll see increasingly other sectors such as forestry, maritime, benefiting from this. Does Planet intend to make the climate-related data freely available or cheaper as part of its mission to address climate change? Well, Planet is a commercial company, and we do provide some data for free. For example, after disaster response, we provide data under the International Disaster Charter. And in the climate change area more broadly, we work with a lot of NGOs and research institutions that we provide special discounts to ensure that you can get access. We will continue to do that as best we can within the limits of still having a commercial business, because we certainly believe in those causes and enabling them. Has anyone ever lowered satellites to increase resolution of a commercial satellite data product? No, I don't believe so. I'm not aware of anyone that has. Of course, it stands to reason that if you lower the satellites, that you will get a higher resolution. But it's a little bit of a risky maneuver where you compromise satellite life, and so it's not something that a lot of engineering risk-averse organizations, of course, would want to do. And so we're a little bit more risk-leaning, and therefore we did it. And we certainly think the risks are outweighed by the benefits in this case. And so far, it's been working very well. With so many social, economic, environmental, epidemiological, and security issues and threats of our modern age, how do you prioritize Planet's work streams? OK, well, obviously, at the start, Planet, we formed Planet with a notion of trying to help environmental and issues of global transparency and other things for the planet. And so very much how we filter what products we build, it's about how can we build a value proposition to the planet. That is normally about solving real challenges on the planet. And we believe that society will reward us for that when we do. So, I mean, it's very much with these issues in mind that we go about designing our products. I hope that answers that question. It's a bit of a big one. The next one is, where are you seeing the biggest growth in your business? Which markets? Well, I think the biggest market growth we've seen is in the civil government sector. I showed you a few examples where we've seen, like the New Mexico State and Land Office. We've had similar counties in California and other parts of the United States picking up our data to use it for regulatory enforcement. We had that classic example that I think I mentioned last year of Humboldt County, which used it to enforce cannabis regulations, which are legal in California but have to be still have permits. And so they were doing permit enforcement using satellite data. Basically, state and local governments haven't had much access to their own satellite data before, and we're providing access to it. And this is being also helped through the partnership with Esri. And you'll hear later today from Jack, who I'll be talking to here on this stage, Jack Dangerman, the CEO of Esri. The next one, 7 clicks a day. What are some of the main use cases for being able to monitor areas of interest at this rate? OK, so, well, it's mainly about vehicle movements, things that change rapidly in intraday issues. So less so big scale things like farming or forest monitoring, more things like vehicles at ports, trains, train stations, things like that. And a lot of people are interested in that, as I mentioned, to sort of track patterns of life. How does this year's announcement go together with Planet's mission of Queryable Earth? Well, certainly all of the capabilities that we put forward today build up towards Queryable Earth. The Queryable Earth vision is being able to search anything you want across the planet and get real-time answers. Our custom model development is an example that we've launched this year that's related to that, because that's a step towards automated models that you would be able to search for things. It's one step, and it's not like, autonomous. It takes a professional service to get there, but it's one step towards being able to have a generically queryable Earth situation. So our global runs of our other analytics feeds, like roads, buildings, ships, and planes. Okay, also on custom model development, the next one is custom model development sounds like it competes directly with partners who currently provide that service. Earlier, you mentioned that being horizontally focused, but custom models are intrinsically vertically focused. Where do partners fit into your strategy moving forward, given this announcement? That's a really great question. What we found was a lot of this is still horizontal in the sense that a lot of people want their models. They're not trying to do them bespoke just for their industry or just for themselves. They're trying to make them available for everyone. It's just that they have to do it more in a custom way for a particular local region. This doesn't mean that it won't be made available then to other partners as well. And there are still much room there for the vertical market-specific applications, because these are about pure machine learning developments on our imagery, as opposed to integrating, say, for example, if you're an ag customer, integrating soil moisture data or weather data into the same mix. Next question is, are you considering fusion of SAR data in your game-changing Planet Fusion data? I definitely think SAR will be one of the ones we will look at, whether that's Sentinel-1 satellite SAR data or others. And so we'll be looking into that amongst other data sets that we will look into for Fusion. Final question, do you provide free software and data to colleges? Well, it's a great question. We do have a program for education and research institutions. You can apply online on planet.com, and there is a fee. It's not free, but the university normally pays for it and then provides it as freely available, but either at a departmental level or a university-wide level. We do have thousands and thousands of researchers and students using our data in that way. Well, thank you very much for the Q&A. Next up, I'm delighted to be introducing former Vice President and dear friend of Planet, Al Gore. Al is perhaps the climate champion around the world today, and with his famous documentary, Inconvenient Truth, he galvanized a movement into the environment space. When he came to visit Planet last year, he gave a talk that Planeteers still talk about today. It excited them so much. Welcome, and thank you for joining us live here today, Al Gore.
Well, thank you very much, Will, and hello, everyone. I want to start by saying that I am indeed a huge fan of Planet and of Will Marshall and of your founding vision. Will, I've watched your progress over the years, and you and I have become friends over the past many years. I really admire what you're doing. Planet is a clear leader in developing the field of daily satellite-based imagery data and insights, and now even more frequently than daily. I've been so impressed with how you've developed this technology as effectively as you have, and more importantly, how you've done it in a way that makes it actionable in helping to solve real-world problems, including, of course, the climate crisis, which, as you know, is what motivates me. And I never imagined I'd be devoting my life to this, but since I first learned about it way back in the 1960s as an undergraduate, it has steadily kind of taken over more and more of my focus, so that it's virtually total right now. And it's a privilege to have work to do that justifies pouring every bit of energy you can into it. Because we're living right now, of course, in an unprecedented time. 2020 has been an especially tumultuous year as the COVID-19 pandemic has completely upended our way of life, and the U.S. and much of the rest of the world has been awakened freshly to the institutional racism and structural injustice, particularly against Black, brown, and indigenous peoples, and of course the widening wealth gap and hyper inequality. Much of our immediate focus is rightly trained now on how to conquer COVID-19 and then build our economies back better. The first principle, as someone said, of pandemic economics is to take care of the pandemic. And I could extrapolate on that, but everybody's had enough of that, and we will all have a choice in 3 weeks from today. At the same time, the climate crisis continues to worsen faster than we are developing and deploying solutions to solve it. We are gaining momentum, and the day may soon arrive when we begin to overtake the crisis, but obviously we're not there yet, and we need to do much, much more. One important note, both the climate crisis and the COVID-19 pandemic have revealed for all to see some of the injustices that people are now rightly demanding that we address. And the climate crisis and COVID-19 are interlinked in so many ways, including that the burning of fossil fuels is responsible not only for global warming, which is the most serious crisis we face, it is also a precondition for increased mortality from COVID-19, because the same fossil fuels that produce CO2 and heat the atmosphere and the Earth system when they're burned, that same combustion also puts conventional air pollution up there, which we know from multiple studies around the world leads to higher death rates from COVID-19. And they're also linked in how science and technology are necessary to solve them. And we've learned that when the epidemiologists and virologists warn us about a coming pandemic, we'd best listen. And since the climate scientists have been warning us for even longer and in even more dire terms about the climate crisis, it's time to listen and respond. One other link, you know, the world is now civilization is now encroaching on the previously wild areas of the world. And partly as a result, we're getting 5 new infectious diseases every year. We now know that 3/4 of these new infectious diseases are so-called zoonotic diseases, that is, diseases that move from animals to humans, as they believe this pandemic moved from bats to humans. But let me focus directly on the climate crisis and the urgency of the climate crisis. Today, we continue to spew more than 150 million tons of man-made global warming pollution into the atmosphere every single day, as if it were an open sewer. As you can see from this space station photo, the atmosphere is a very thin shell surrounding the planet, and we're using it as an open sewer. And it accumulates there. The average residence time for a CO2 molecule is 100 years. The math is complicated for the rest, but CO2 is a good proxy for the overall problem. And the amount accumulated there now is trapping enough extra heat every single day to equal what would be released by 600,000 Hiroshima-class atomic bombs exploding every single day in the Earth's atmosphere. The consequences of this extraordinary amount of extra heat are all around us. The most recent stark example is the current crisis of wildfires happening in California, Washington, Oregon, and other Western states. This year, more than 8,400 fires have burned more than 4 million acres in California. That's by far the worst on record. And you can add in more than 1 million acres in Oregon and 2/3 of a million acres in Washington state. A lot of people died, many more remain missing. Right now, today, there are currently 72 large fires burning across the U.S., including 19 just in the state of California. And the land area burned is absolutely extraordinary. This is all happening because of the extra heat and the higher temperatures. California and the West have been in what the scientists called a mega drought since the beginning of this millennium for 20 years now. The region has suffered one of its driest Augusts on record this summer, and a record-setting heat wave in August. Death Valley hit 130 degrees Fahrenheit, maybe the highest reliably recorded temperature ever on Earth, certainly one of the highest. Last month, September 6th, part of Los Angeles County was 121 degrees Fahrenheit in California, in Los Angeles County. And in the state, heat waves are now 3 to 4 degrees Fahrenheit hotter due to the climate crisis. And unfortunately, this is continuing. We're continuing to make the problem worse, and we have to grab hold of it. It's worth noting that some of the early wildfires in California were sparked by nearly 11,000 lightning strikes over a 3-day period. And some climate scientists are reminding us that for every 1 degree increase in warming, there's a 12% increase in lightning strikes. And of course, it's not just the US. This past year, record high temperatures created the worst fire season in the history of Australia, causing the evacuation of tens of thousands of people and emergency declarations in their 2 biggest states. And the scientists calculated that the climate crisis made these fires way more likely than they would have been otherwise. We've seen the fires in the Amazon. Those are man-set fires in a misguided strategy of clearing the land. And we don't have time to go into why it's so destructive and foolish. And if you look at all the fires in California, there have been 10 times that many in Siberia, but the news cameras don't get there, and so they don't capture our attention. Now, I'm well aware, believe me, after talking about this for so long, that news like this can bring you down. And it's not even, we haven't even talked about the hurricanes that are battering our coast. We had another one just a couple of days ago, the flooding that prevented farmers in the Midwest from planting 20 million acres last year. The climate migrations predicted to expand to 1 billion climate immigrants and refugees in this century, destabilizing entire regions, threatening the political equilibrium, as has already occurred in parts of Europe when the refugees from the Syrian climate-related drought came across, and the Civil War, of course. As these impacts continue to get worse, it's good to focus on the good news that is now coming in. The solutions are available to us. And not only are they available, they're being driven by incredible advances in modern science and technology, and they have underpinned a dramatic decline in the price of solar, the price of wind, the price of batteries and electric vehicles. The fastest growing job in the US right now over the next decade is projected to be wind turbine technician. Solar installers, the third fastest growing job. And over the past 5 years, solar jobs grew 5 times faster than average job growth. This is a real opportunity for the kind of recovery we need coming out of the pandemic worldwide and in the US. And it's driven by the decline in costs that I mentioned. Just in the last decade or so, solar costs in the US have dropped 74%. Wind costs have dropped 75%. EV battery costs have dropped 82%. LED light bulbs have dropped in cost by 94%. And we're seeing on a global basis, the market has shifted rapidly. Here are 3 markers to use. 5 years ago, the electricity from solar and wind was cheaper than electricity from new coal and gas plants in only 1% of the world. Today, 5 years later, solar and wind electricity is cheaper than fossil electricity in more than 2/3 of the world. And in the next 5 years, it will be cheaper in 100% of the world, as the last holdouts in Japan and Southeast Asia also cross that benchmark. So the team at Planet is also at the forefront of another exciting field of new technology in satellite imagery and data, giving decision makers the information needed to better understand the impacts of our decisions, to see and visualize change, and to take action with tools that can make a huge difference. At Will's encouragement, I want to take this opportunity to brief you very briefly on about another solution that uses satellites along with ground-based, sea-based, and air-based sensors and multiple data streams on the internet, all crunched in artificial intelligence with machine learning, something I know that folks in this virtual room understand very, very well. I am among those helping to lead a new effort called Climate Trace. TRACE stands for Tracking Real-Time Atmospheric Carbon Emissions. It's an incredible coalition of leading tech and climate groups that is building a global, verifiable, and comprehensive greenhouse emissions tracking tool. The problem that Climate Trace helps solve is the long-standing dilemma of identifying and measuring precisely where all these emissions are coming from, precisely and in real time, so that nations, companies, NGOs, activists, investors, business leaders, and other organizations can be strategic in planning how to reduce these emissions as quickly as possible. Up until now, the reporting of emissions has been a patchwork, bottom-up, voluntary largely system that relies on infrequent self-reporting with long time delays, reporting by countries and by companies, and a lack of dependable, independent third-party verification creates uncertainty about whether the data is reliable and accurate, much less up to date. The lag in reporting reduces the actionability of that information. In some cases, it's virtually useless. Here's one example of the problem. Just ahead of the Paris conference, where the agreement was negotiated in 2015, China announced they had been burning 17% more coal than what they had previously reported. That's the equivalent of an additional 1 billion tons of CO2 emissions annually, equal to all of Germany's emissions from the consumption of fossil fuels. So Climate Trace has the promise to make that problem history. We're harnessing all of these data sources and along with artificial intelligence and machine learning and other cutting-edge approaches, plus world-class data scientists and organizations, we're creating a first-of-a-kind initiative to track emissions in real time with unprecedented independence, detail, and speed. We're excited to continue to develop this tool through 2020 and into 2021, and we now see our way clear to being ready to release a full global emissions report in the spring or summer of next year, after which much of it will be updated every 6 hours. Like many AI projects, this tool will continuously improve as the team adds more data sources, more data, works out more sophisticated algorithms, has more ground truthing and more ways to audit and verify every bit of it. Our general target is to have the report out well in advance of COP26, the Conference of the Parties, where the Paris Agreement is going to be updated, held in Glasgow 1 year from this month, because this tool is going to be extremely valuable in the international climate negotiations. I have already talked with the Secretary General of the UN, the chairman of COP26, and all of the principal players who are preparing for that negotiation. They are all very excited to have, for the first time, real-time data. And as you know, my interest in satellites goes back a long time. I've learned a lot from Will, but he and I have a good time kind of geeking out together. I'm a wannabe geek. Will is an honest-to-goodness geek. But for my part, I've long believed that satellites provide a unique and important perspective about our planet, our relationship to it, and its fragility. That's one of the reasons why a long time ago, as vice president, I pushed for the creation of what became the Deep Space Climate Observatory satellite, or DISCOVER, which is now 1 million miles away from the Earth at the L1 point, where it rotates the sun in tandem with the Earth. And it helps us track the impacts of the climate crisis on our planet in real time. It's producing more than a dozen blue marble type images of our Earth every single day. The disk of the Earth is fully illuminated because it's between the Earth and the sun. And we've been able to see smoke from the recent fires in California all the way from 1 million miles away, very, very clearly. We're working on some brand new ideas to make this information even more usable for people looking to understand how the crisis is affecting where they live. So we all understand the importance of protecting our common home. That original blue marble photo inspired so many of us. And I'm grateful to you, Will, for the work we've been able to chart out together to link up this collection of images in a way that makes it even more valuable when added to Planet's images. So let me close by thanking you again for the opportunity to address you. I look forward to some questions. I'm confident that the ideas shared and the relationships created during this conference and beyond are going to help us harness the energy and ideas and creativity that we need to solve the climate crisis. So I look forward to our conversation, Will. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much, Al. It's really great to have you here. And of course, we're doing this virtually because COVID has turned the world upside down in many ways. And one of the good things about that is that people have flown less and sometimes even consumed less. What are some of the changes in behavior that you think we should keep after the end of the COVID pandemic?
Well, I'm betting that just about everybody tuned in as part of this conference has become their own expert on that question. And I certainly believe that we have all learned how to maintain our work. Those of us who are lucky enough to have work that's Zoomable, and Zoom is like Kleenex now. It's become a verb as well as, and a noun as well as a brand. But there are other ways as too. And in some cases, I'm sure most of you have discovered what my partners and I have discovered, that in the virtual world, some things can even be improved in a collaborative, remote, virtual environment.
Yeah,
there are things that can't be replaced when you miss the in-person meetings. And of course, what we're likely to see is the emergence of a hybrid model for a lot of organizations and businesses. I've been doing all of my work from home, from interviews like this one to video conferencing with my colleagues every day. My nonprofit organization, the Climate Reality Project, has now trained over 32,000 climate leaders worldwide with communications and advocacy skills and in-depth knowledge on the climate crisis and its solutions. We've had to move to an online platform, but I've been able to train another 10,000 new climate leaders from this homemade studio, which also presented a new challenge. I enjoy presenting my slideshows in person, but I've had to adjust by setting up a studio on the bottom floor of my house, and I've been spending a lot of time on FaceTime and Zoom video conferences with an engineer who's kind of walked me through the installation of this studio step by step. I did it all.
Seems like
I have maybe too much pride in that because I've never built anything like this before. But I'm hopeful that we're going to see many of the practices that we've come up with, all of us, during this lockdown time and social distancing time, even after we have a vaccine, which I hope is soon, or it may be more likely that we get extremely effective therapeutics. I'll take either one. But more people are going to be working more from home and attending more conferences virtually, avoiding more air travel. But I hope the biggest lesson we learn is that we have a choice about our common future. As these shutdowns and partial lockdowns were instituted in country after country, we saw massive drops in air pollution, with dolphins returning to the canals of Venice. And many people were amazed at how much clearer the air became in a very short period of time. Unfortunately, we already knew from the global financial crisis 12 years ago that the air pollution levels would come right back after the economy restarted. But we have seen that there is an alternative, and we've seen the opportunity to make an enormous difference. And with those steep cost reduction curves I mentioned earlier, we now know that we can do that while saving money, creating jobs, as we're solving the climate crisis, or making a progress on that, and making the air we breathe cleaner. To be more specific, as governments are working to rebuild economies after the pandemic, we need to ensure that we're making our investments in a sustainable future and not just bailing out the dirty ways and the polluters of the past.
Yeah. I could not agree more. I could not agree more, Al. And you know, there are some silver lining. Of course, we'd never wish this pandemic, but there are some silver lining aspects of it. Another one that I feel is that we've learned that we can change behavior in this big and systematic way if we choose to. And one of the things I keep on thinking about is, why is it that we've reacted with such change and intensity to the pandemic, but we haven't to the massive destruction of the ecosystems on the planet? And I was reflecting in my talk, I said, you know, had 68% of the wildlife on the Earth disappeared in 4 months rather than 40 years, which it took place in, I mean, it's just shocking had that really just taken place overnight. Maybe we'd be responding more intensely. And if it's just a question of timescale, if it was just a question of things happening faster, how do we communicate that? Because 68% of the wildlife on the planet has gone. It is a big deal. People do care about that. But because it happens so slowly, people aren't really noticing. So how do you communicate that? If it's just a timescale issue, how do we do better at communicating that?
Yeah, it's a great question, Will. And for a long time, it was all too easy for many to view the climate crisis as a far off issue. Maybe we'll think about that tomorrow. But one of the biggest changes in the past decade is that we're seeing the impacts here and now. I've said many times, every night on the TV news is like a nature hike through the book of Revelation. The fires in California that I mentioned, and the increasingly powerful and destructive hurricanes hitting the Gulf Coast of the U.S. and in the Bay of Bengal recently, elsewhere. The record downpours around the world, what scientists are calling rain bombs, and the flooding and the melting of the ice and the sea level rise accelerating. These are all disrupting the lives and livelihoods of millions of people around the world right now, right today. And the increasing awareness of these events driven by the climate crisis is one of the major reasons, I'm convinced, why we're seeing a lot more attention to this issue now, and a lot more action by a lot of governments and businesses and investors and average folks who are becoming activists on this. Both the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis are driven by the need to change the way we think about the relationship of humanity to our planet. Yep. Too often we view the Earth as a resource available for our exploitation to meet our needs in the present generation, without stopping to realize that we're undermining the climate stability and the ecological stability that has allowed the flourishing of human civilization, especially over the past 10,000 years.
Yeah.
Changing the way we think, for example, to prioritize a model of sustainable capitalism, which doesn't borrow from the future to meet the needs of the present, can give us the frame of mind we need to see how all of these issues are connected to one another. But even if we had been more aware of the impacts of the climate crisis sooner, we also need to tackle the democracy crisis, because our slowness to respond is also rooted in political obstacles that have prevented us from taking appropriate action, even though we have long since had the basic facts for decades. And by the way, the next exercise in fixing the political crisis, I will say again, is 3 weeks from today. And in many states, including yours and mine, you can vote right now. Please do.
Thank you very much. And let me just, so you're really saying that the intensity is actually here now in all of these crazy weather events, and hopefully that will change our perspectives. And I was reading just this morning in the New York Times that even the wetlands of Brazil, where a quarter of the wetlands in this area of Pantanal are alight and burning. And it's so sad to think about that, because it's such a precious biodiverse region. So, yeah. But it does remind us that it is here. And I want to just finish by asking you a question about agriculture. And we geek out on satellites, but we also geek out on agriculture. It's a shared passion as well. And it's important for multiple reasons that we move towards sustainable or regenerative agriculture. It produces healthier diets, it captures carbon, it increases biodiversity, and it reduces deforestation if you do it well. And so it's a reason why it's a win-win-win-win, you know, if you do it well. I understand that you have a big event next week on regenerative agriculture. What are you aiming to achieve there?
Yeah, well, thank you for asking. It's another virtual conference. It's called the Climate Underground Conference. And again, this year we're focusing, and we're doing it virtually this year. Regenerative agriculture is about cultivating the land in a way that restores soil health and removes some of the excess carbon from the atmosphere. For too long, agriculture has only been considered part of the problem, when in fact, if it's done correctly, farming can be a big part of the solution to the climate crisis. A couple of facts to consider. If you look at all of the 4 trillion trees in the world and all of the vegetation and combine all of that, that has less than 1/3 the amount of carbon than is in the topsoils of the earth. And there used to be much more. There's twice as much carbon in the topsoil as there is in the atmosphere. And if we stopped this intensive plowing and reliance on synthetic chemicals to an absurd degree, and instead kept roots in the ground with cover crops and diversity and rotational grazing and no-till or extremely low-till. I've transitioned my own family farm over the last decade into a regenerative farm to grow healthy food and at the same time make the soil healthier and more productive. And we're making it a testing ground here to develop and validate soil carbon sequestration practices and serve as a part of a larger research project to help advance the state of soil science in collaboration with some great scientists. You know, I'll close with this, Will. When I was a young boy on this farm, my father taught me many lessons, including where the most productive soil was. And I remember it vividly. I was about 5 or 6 years old, and the most productive soil was black and moist. I'm embarrassed it took me 50 years before I actually realized why it's black. That's the carbon. And the reason it's moist usually is because healthy soils with rich biodiversity and roots in the soil holds the water much more effectively. When those 20 million acres couldn't be planted in the Midwest last year because of the downpours and floods, actually a percentage of that destroyed land was eventually replanted, and those were the areas that had converted to no-till and regenerative farming practices. That's what we need to do around the world, and we can do it in a way that verifies the buildup of soil carbon and makes it possible to create a market for carbon credits and soil organic carbon, the same way owners of big timberland stretches get checks in the mail now. So it is a part of the solution, could be one of the most significant parts of the solution. So thank you for asking me about it, and I'll look forward to seeing you there virtually next week.
Yeah, thanks very much, Al. Well, with that, we're out of time. I think sustainable agriculture is a great way to an uplifting end point to our conversation. Thanks again for joining us here at Planet Explore 2020.
Good luck, Will.
Thank you.